Good evening, all. Are we live, or are we on tape?
It says in stream.
And
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think I'm centered on the camera. Good evening, all. Happy July 5th. I hope the 4th was with you. A long time ago, I thought I was really clever because on July 4th, I started saying, "May the 4th be with you," until May the 4th became the issue. And every year on May 4th, everyone says, "May the 4th be with you." And so I got preempted by people more clever than I am. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining us, on this very typical Seattle summer evening. I have a theory about weather in Seattle, having lived here for, well over 30 years. And that is that summer in Seattle begins on July 5th. And I don't know why, but almost every year, not this year, but almost every year on July 4th, it rains. And it rains like on and off through the end of, all you people who are online and not here, I'm sure you don't give a damn about any of this, but we're all here. And but every year it seems like it rains on and off through the end of June, and on July 4th, no matter what kind of outdoor events or picnics or whatever, it seems like there's always some rain, if not a lot of rain. And then like magically, like someone up there knows, just to mess with us, on July 5th, the weather turns sunny and summer-like, and here we are, and it is summer and sunny. So, and on top of that, we also have a new moon today that was exact at 3:57, I think. I can validate that here real quickly. 3:57 p.m., and that was Pacific time. And I would at this time also like to welcome all of those who are with us this evening. And although they are here, they are not here. And I'm sure that some of you get bored of hearing me talking about non-locality, but it used to be when I said, "Hey, we're all here," it meant we were all here. But now those of us that are here can be in one end of the country to the other, and some in Australia and in France and in England, and here is no longer here. So just a confusing thing about these times. But I would like to thank everyone online who's joined us. Before we get into the material, I just want to mention in passing real quickly one thing, and that is that many of you know that one of my loves in astrology is its relationship to music and frequency and vibrations. And I'm going to be teaching a 5-week course at Kepler College, which is online, beginning on not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, meaning July 14th. And for information on that, you can go to keplercollege.org and find out more about that. And it'll be a 5-week course on harmonic aspects, which takes aspects into a slightly more modern and newer way of looking at them. And I'll say a little bit more about harmonic aspects later this evening, but not any more about the class. If you're interested, you know where to go. Okay, so here we are. I've been on the road for the month of June. For those of you who were here last month, You know that we met on May 31st because the first Friday night in June, I was teaching at the Omega Institute just north of New York City, and pretty much spent the entire month of June in the Northeast. It's good to be back where things seem to be saner, and maybe that's just because they're farther away from Washington, D.C., and we're not going there. Wherever there is, as opposed to here, because some people who are here might be there. How does that work? Okay. However, for those of you who also have... There is a dog. No, wait, that's... I got that backwards. For those of you online who couldn't hear the dog bark, it was a dog, not a god. So for those of you who watched my July forecast, you know that the topic that I always assign a few words for the month ahead was something like storm clouds ahead. And although on the YouTube channel I took a little bit of criticism for that, people saying, why are you always so negative? And my response was very simple, and that is there is no negativity about a storm. In fact, a storm releases tension. That's what storms do. When there is a warm, wet air mass that is charged negatively, negative ions, and although negative ions sound like they're bad, they're the charge that really makes life feel good. And it's basically from water moving against water at the ocean or by a murmuring brook or by a waterfall or in the shower. Those are all natural negative ion generators. Meanwhile, cold, dry air makes positive ions, which makes us antsy or maybe insecty, because the insects all go crazy when the cool, dry winds blow. There's an old saying that says an ill wind blows no good. And every locality has what they call ill winds, and they're usually cooler, drier air that comes in either from the north or from the inland. Anyone who's ever lived in Southern California knows the Santa Anas or the Chinooks in the central part of the United States that blow down from Canada, or the Fen in Switzerland, or the Sabra in the Middle East. These winds do not feel good. When cold, dry air or cold, dry air mass meets a warm, wet air mass, they try to work it out. And unlike what we're taught in Psychology 101, or unlike what your therapist has probably told you, talking about it isn't always good. I mean, it usually is, and it's a good philosophy to kind of work with. But there are some things in all of our individual lives that the more we talk about it, the worse it gets, because of tension from people around us or relationship issues that get stirred up or whatever. And we learn to hold some of those things. And as we do, the tension builds. Well, just like that, the two air masses that meet coming into a storm, the wet, warm air and the cold, dry air, as they try to work it out and as they try to communicate with each other, what occurs is what happens when you live in northern climates and the air is very dry, and in the winter time, you touch a light socket or shake someone's hand, you get a spark, because the electricity doesn't flow easily with the cold, dry air. Why are we talking about all this? We're talking about storms, because what happens is that when tension builds, just like when you rub like wool or on a balloon and you create that static electricity and then the balloon sticks to anything, that as two things rub together but don't work it out, the tension gets greater and greater. And when you have positive and negative tension at the same time, they attract each other, but they're also creating more tension in doing that. And so what happens is that the lightning needs to strike. And the lightning striking is what happens during a storm, whether we actually see the lightning or the electrical release or not. What's happening is a storm is nature's way of resolving pent-up tension that cannot, for whatever reason, easily express. You with me? All right, so what's the planet that's associated in astrology with lightning striking that releases pent-up tension? Uranus, or Uranus, or Uranus, or Uranus, or however you choose to speak it. But Uranus is the planet that's associated with electricity, and it's the planet that's associated with electricity that flows. Now, here's an interesting thing about Pluto, which, as we know, has just moved into Aquarius, is now going retrograde, will back into Capricorn, just for a couple of months, right around the election time in the United States, and then move back into Aquarius in December, where it will stay for the next couple of decades, nearly 20 years. Uranus is don't say anything out loud yet, fire, earth, air, or water. Uranus is the water bearer. Is it a fire sign, an air sign, a water sign, or an earth sign? It's an air sign, although it's the water bearer. What's that about? What that's about is that when the air is dry, it can't conduct electricity, which is why the tension builds and then a spark needs to occur to release that tension. When you go to cold, dry climates like Scandinavia or England or central Canada, where the air is very cold, the psychic transmissions, the emotional transmissions they don't flow as easily. Then when you go to some of the Mediterranean or the South Pacific island, climates where it's warm and humid, it just seems like emotions flow with greater ease. There's less holding it back. And this is tied to the concept of Aquarius being an air sign. It's intellectual, air thinking, according to Jung, whereas water is feeling, emotional. But an air sign like Aquarius, the symbol is the wavy lines because air is basically carrying the moisture, which allows for the communication. In modern astrology, Aquarius is related, every planet every planet relates to a sign, every sign relates to a planet. The ancients called this concept rulerships. Planets ruled signs. The moon rules Cancer. Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, and so on. We moderners try to avoid some of these old leftover patriarchal terms, and therefore I and many other astrologers that I know try to avoid using the word rule, because it isn't a top-down authoritative thing, it's an associative thing. But in ancient astrology, many of the planets did double duty. Venus ruled or was associated with both Taurus and Libra. Mars with both Aries and Scorpio. Jupiter with both Sagittarius and Pisces. Saturn with both Capricorn and Aquarius. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Neptune, but then once you get out past Saturn to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they were only discovered in the 1700s, 1900s. So astrologers assigned them to some of the outer planets that were already doing double duty for good reason, because it makes sense. But what happened was that when Uranus was discovered, it was realized that Uranus is associated with Aquarius, Saturn being the holding back and the building up of the tension, the emotions not expressing, but Uranus being the breaking through, the flow of energy that can be shocking. And Uranus is often called the planet of shock and surprise. It's the revolutionary planet. It was discovered, it was discovered around the time that Pluto was moving into Aquarius 250 years ago, at the beginning of the American and French Revolutionary Wars and that period of time, when we had a first taste of what it was like to live in a society or a country that theoretically, I'm going to use the air quotes around that, theoretically was ruled by the common people, by the people in the country, rather than by a divine right of a particular family who owned that country, and everything and everyone in that country were their subjects. Like in the United States, we were all subjects of King George and the United, at that time, of England. And in France, the monarchy had existed for centuries. So Pluto's entry into Aquarius occurred right around the same time as the discovery of Uranus. And so what's interesting here is that we have this flavor of what happens when attempts at democracy are made, when attempts at ruling the social by the collective of the people rather than by a top-down authority. So here we are 250 years later. As I've talked about in previous months here, every year on our birthday, we celebrate the sun's returning to where it was when we were born. We call it our birthday. Every 29 and a half years, those of us who know celebrate what's called a Saturn return. It's the 29 and a half year cycle of Saturn. It's like a Saturn birthday. It's like we're 1 year old on Saturn when we turn about 29 and a half. Saturn being the planet of responsibility and authority and maturity. And typically, most of us who are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s can look back at our 29, 30-year period of life and realize, wow, we made changes at that point in our life that really changed the direction of our life. Or we didn't, and then we regretted it 7 years later, 7 being 1/4 of a Saturn cycle. So here we are at the United States of America's first Pluto birthday. Unlike the sun, where it's the illumination, the vitality, the light that we celebrate on our birthday, unlike Saturn, which is serious and growing up and becoming real and taking authority for ourselves, Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto has to do with everything that's not on the surface. Pluto has to do with, well, when it was discovered in the early 1930s, it just assumed that the entire world was falling apart. We had the rise of mass fascism, kind of like we do now. But when Pluto was discovered, like all the outer planets when they were discovered, they were all thought to be horrific, catastrophic, fearful. Uranus was that when it was discovered in the 18th century, was thought to be the planet of catastrophe, disaster. There was no talk about Uranus also being the planet associated with creative genius and inventiveness and breakthrough in technology. When Neptune was discovered in the 19th century, it was considered to be the planet of delusions and of psychosis and of mental institutions. And there was no talk about Neptune being the planet of spirituality and imagination. And when Pluto was discovered in 1931, I think, there was no talk about Pluto being the planet of psychological transformation. There was no talk of Pluto being the planet of metamorphosis. Pluto was associated with the domination of evil, with death, with destruction. So we are at the first birthday of Pluto in the United States, 250 years ago, 248 to be exact. And we are seeing this unfold certainly in the United States, but we're seeing it unfold all around the planet. Now, what does this have to do with storms? I'll get there. So, a storm is basically the release of pent-up tension. In astrology, Uranus is the planet that's associated with lightning striking and releasing that pent-up tension. In fact, Uranus had just been discovered and Pluto had just moved into Aquarius when Benjamin Franklin was flying his infamous kite. Actually, it's a little lack of clarity around that. It turns out that he may have made his son do it because he was afraid it would kill him. But that's another story. All right, so we are at a point where we have seen in this country and all around the world, as evidenced by recent elections in Europe and in England, and certainly what's going on here in the United States, what has gone on recently in elections in India. It's all around the world. And what we're seeing is this incredible tension created by extreme polarity. My word of the decade is bifurcation. Things seem to be separated into two, and it's like the right hand and the left hand are not talking with one another. And there's a deep dive that we can go on right and left hand. And probably some of you have heard one of my talks online on the gender issues of what we're experiencing in culture right now. Very, very briefly, Latin for right is dexter. And the right hand is connected to the left side of the brain. There's a flip in our nervous system. And our right hand is the hand that does things. The right hand connected to the left side of the brain. The left side of the brain is the side of the brain that sequences. It's logic, it's rationality, it's cause and effect. It's yang, it's the male, for lack of a better word. Yang is maybe a better word, side of the brain. And Latin for right is dexter or dextra. The left hand is connected to the right side of the brain, and the right side of the brain is simultaneous. There's no linear, there's no cause and effect, there's no sequencing, and the right side of the brain connected with the left hand is more emotional. It's more imaginative because everything happens simultaneously. This is a gross oversimplification, but what's interesting and important is that if you can use both hands, what's the word that we say to use both hands? What does that mean? It means two right hands. It doesn't mean both hands. We have a built-in judgment about both hands using them. It really means you have two right hands. The left hand, sinestra, is sinister. We have a built-in judgment culturally, partly due to our use of the alphabet, which is sequential processing. And again, there's a much deeper dive. In fact, I'll put the link on the saved version of this live stream, which will be on my YouTube channel by tomorrow. I'll put a link up that goes to a lecture that I do a much deeper dive into this. We don't have time tonight. But this bifurcation, this polarity, the right brain, left brain. The word for the two chambers of the brain is bicameral. We have a bicameral brain. And in fact, the only other place I've ever heard the word bicameral used is to describe the government of the United States. It's a bicameral system. What does the word cameral mean? It means chamber. So there's two chambers to our brain. There's two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate in our government. Here's a crazy thing, and I'm a total etymology fan, geek, whatever. The word camera actually comes from the same root, because the original cameras actually captured the image in a chamber. And that's what a camera, that's the root of the word camera, chamber. So here we are at a point in history where the tension is very, very great. It's like a tug of war that is pulling these energies in opposite directions. Whether you think of it, the right hand and the left hand not talking to each other, or the right brain and left brain not talking to each other, whether you think of it as progressive versus conservative in the political realm, whether you think of it as freedom of body autonomy versus social control of those issues. I mean, there's so many issues that we can use to frame these polarities. I mean, even, things about climate control, there's people who just know the reality of climate control, and anyone who doesn't believe in it is just plain stupid. And then there are people who say climate change. I said climate control. Did I say that? Climate change. I'm sorry. And then there are those people who think that climate change is absolutely just crazy, made up, and anyone who believes in it is stupid. And just like the positive and negative air masses that try to work it out and can't, the more you talk with someone who has a belief that is so ingrained in their belief system, it's not really based on facts, it's based upon a religious sense that facts don't change what you believe. And because of that, the left gets lefter, the right gets righter, and it just becomes more and more polarized. Now, into this, we have in July a depolarizing event. And that event happens on July 15th, which just happens to be the first day of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Now, I'm not going to pretend for one moment that I know what's going to happen when the planet Mars, which right now, let's actually, let me bring up a chart here, somewhere here.
You can just go to the thing and I can pull it up on the stream.
Oh, okay. All right. So here we are looking at a chart for this evening. This is actually a chart. Oh, why is this for 5:30? Oh, there we go. Here's a chart for right now. This is 7 p.m. Pacific time. For those of you who are new, either online or here at SoulFood tonight in Redmond, when I do charts online, I don't do charts that show the houses and the ascendant, because in astrology, when we do a chart, we do it for a particular location. We're back to that whole problem of where is here. Well, here is not here for someone who's watching online, or someone who will be watching in a week or two from some other part of the world. And so I'm using a chart that just shows 0 degrees of Aries rising, meaning the rising sign is what's on the eastern horizon in all astrology charts. The point on the far left is the eastern horizon. If it's the first time you've ever looked at a horoscope, it's exactly opposite from a map, because when you look at a map, the left is west. But we're looking up, so it reverses. In fact, in a map, this point straight up would be due north. But in an astrology horoscope, that's due south. Why? Because the sun in the northern hemisphere at high noon is directly overhead, but the sun is always to the south. All right, so we are looking at a chart for this moment. And it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, anywhere on the planet, the sun is at 14.5 degrees of Cancer. That's 14 degrees and 31 minutes. There's 60 minutes in a degree, just like there's 60 minutes in an hour. Once you remember that, it's really easy to convert minutes to degrees by just thinking of a clock, for those of you who remember those things that went around in circles and had hands on them. Same thing. What we can also see, though, is that the moon here is at 16 degrees of Cancer. It's about 1.5 degrees higher degrees than the sun. Are you with me here? That the sun is at 14.5 degrees of Cancer, and the moon is at 16 degrees and 4 minutes, but just barely 16 degrees. So the moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours, which means that this is about 6 hours, give or take, after the exact alignment of the sun and the moon. And in fact, if we backed this up to We're doing this a day at a time. Sorry, here, bear with me here just a quick second. If we back this up to, we'll do it this way, to 3:57, we can see that at 3:57 Pacific time, adjust to your time zone wherever you are, that the sun and the moon were both at 14 degrees and 23 minutes. When the sun and the moon are at the same degree, same minutes, that's a new moon. That's what a new moon is. From Earth's point of view, it looks like the sun and the moon are aligned at the same point. So we come back to now, and we can see that the moon has moved a few degrees further. But I want to look back over here at these two planets here, the red one being Mars at roughly 19 and a half degrees of Taurus. That's 19 degrees and 36 minutes. And Uranus at almost 26 degrees of Taurus. It's at 25 degrees and 57 minutes. Remember, there's 60 minutes in a degree like there's 60 minutes in an hour. So this is just a hair prior to 26 degrees. Just, again, trying to make it easier for you to see what these numbers mean. Uranus moves pretty slowly. It takes 84 years to go around the sun once. Not as slowly as Pluto. That takes 248 years to go around the sun once. Mars goes around the sun from Earth's point of view in a little bit less than 2 years. What that means is that we have Mars, the planet of boundary making, the planet of ego, the planet Mars, the warrior planet. Matter of fact, Mars in the Greek mythology is the god of war. Ares is Greek for Mars, which is Latin. And Mars basically is about conflict, and all conflict is not bad. There are times when we need to defend our boundaries, either physically or metaphysically. I mean, just by saying the right thing, that can be an act of war. So what's significant to understand here is that Mars, once every little bit less than 2 years, it depends on complicated astronomical movements based on retrograde motion that I don't want to get into right now. But you can think of the fact that Mars catches up to Uranus about every 2 years. A little bit less than that usually, but about every 2 years. It will do that on July 15th. So you can see here on July 14th, Mars is at 25 degrees Taurus and 58 minutes, and Uranus is at 26 degrees and 18 minutes. By the following day, Mars has passed Uranus and is now moving on the other side of it. Can you see that graphically, what's happening there? Why is this significant? Well, what's the key words for Uranus?
Revolution.
Come on, more. You're doing right. More.
Surprise.
All of those things. Lightning, shock, surprise, technological breakthrough, expression, revolution. It's the planet of shock and surprise. Uranus. It's lightning. It's the electrical breakthrough that breaks through the structure that Saturn has created, which is the wall between the two ends of the polarity. Hang on one second. Mars is what? War, anger, fierceness. Now, these events don't always happen on the day. In fact, Mars, if we move this back, well, we'll just let this run backwards a little faster here. And we can see that Mars was actually in Aries all the way up to the beginning of June when it first moved into Taurus. You can see, right, just looking at Mars right there. There's Mars moving into Taurus. So over the past month, Mars has been inching closer and closer and closer and closer to Uranus. And we can expect the tensions to build and build and build, and then something to basically eradicate those tensions. Now, when I say eradicate, I don't mean make them go away forever, because if you've ever been here in Seattle, we don't get the same kind of thunder lightning storms that much of the other country gets. You know, for us, often an intense storm has one huge clap of thunder and lightning, and kind of that's it for the year. Partly because we don't get the extreme hot, cold air masses that happen in the central parts of the country or in the Northeast, where I was last month and experienced a night, play of just like, oh my God, it's just like every which way the thunder is, the lightning is striking, and then the thunder follows that you can hear. But moving back to the 15th, or moving even back to now, we can see how close Mars is getting to Uranus. And here's why we are all like insects prior to a storm. Because the positive ionization, the stuckness, the feeling like the tensions are getting greater, the ill wind that blows no good, there's no way to see around it. And again, when the lightning strikes, there's a wonderful line from, I can't remember what hexagram it's in the I Ching, that says, thunder and lightning is followed by laughter. If it doesn't hit you, there's something about the tension that's released. It doesn't mean that there's no tension at all, although it does mean in that moment, whatever it is releases kind of does relieve some tension in that moment. The problem, however, is that, again, sometimes communicating everything is not necessarily the best idea. You can look back in history of people's acts physically that were done to communicate something that sometimes were not necessarily the best idea. Regardless, as we move closer and closer to July 15th, Mars will inch closer and closer and closer to Uranus until it actually makes that alignment. Now, what's going to happen on July 15th? Or 14th, or 13th, or 12th, or 16th, 17th, or 18th? I don't know. And no one else does either. But something will happen. Does it mean that it has to be catastrophic and bad? No, but we humans have a tendency to somehow manifest dumb shit when the pressure is on us, do we not? I began, I'm going to turn this into a longer lecture, not tonight. But I began looking at, as I thought about what I wanted to talk about tonight, because as you know, the monthly that I do online really talks about all the events through the month. And rather than replaying that here on Astrology Night, I've decided to always pick some areas in which to talk more about, and not necessarily just try to accomplish the whole, repetition of the day by day by day. But earlier today, I used my amazing software that many astrologers have, whether there's many varieties of really excellent astrology software out there, that 2 or 3 or 4 generations ago, and for all history, astrologers did not have these tools. With just the matter of hitting a few buttons on my computer and hitting enter, I got a list of every time Mars and Uranus aligned exactly since the year 1850. Why 1850? I needed a starting point. Because remember, they do this every other year. So that's like, 75 alignments or so in 150 years, if that, or a little bit more actually. I didn't get very far in this, but I started with 1900. And the first Mars-Uranus alignment that occurred in 1900 occurred on November 3rd, 1901. Now, when we talk about a single event like a planetary alignment like Mars-Uranus conjunction, we're pulling an active ingredient out of the whole complex of energies. It's like taking aspirin and thinking that has the magical same healing properties that white willow bark does, and aspirin salicylic acid is actually derived from a compound found in white willow bark, just as an example. When we look at a chart, we really need to look at the entire chart, not just an I'm a this and you're a that and my moon's in this or my this is square that or whatever. There's an entire environment. I'm not looking at that right now. I'm just looking at the active ingredient. November 3rd, 1901, there was an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction. And on November 2nd, within 24 hours of that exact alignment, President William McKinley was assassinated. So that was my opening. It was a stab in the dark. I mean, I have a lot of, oh, that was bad. Actually, I think it was a shot in the dark. Actually, it was a shot in the light. I think he was at an event in Buffalo, does anybody remember? Yeah. There was also a banking crisis that week, but that's the first event that stood out. The next thing that I searched was the following conjunction in 1903, and I saw too many little things and not something that just jumped at me. And here's the thing. I mean, this is like cherry picking statistically. I mean, this is not meant to be proof in any sense of of the imagination at all. But I've done this with other cycles, as have other astrologers. And it seems that oftentimes a cycle will go dormant. It'll just won't express for one or two times, and then it'll express. And it'll do that again and again and again. And oftentimes the same issues come up, separated by several times of repetition of that cycle. So the next one I looked at was October 8th, 1905. And immediately I realized this was at the height of the beginning of the Russian Revolution. And in fact, just a couple of days prior to that exact conjunction, there was this uprising that basically convinced the then Tsar Nicholas to transform the Russian government from an autocracy into a constitutional government. That was within the week of that conjunction in 1905. On May 1st, 1907, at the next conjunction, that was within a couple of days, that was the initiation of the Panic of 1907, considered to be the first global economic meltdown. Just saying. I skipped a couple, but I was intrigued. I decided then I didn't have much time. I'm going to bring it up closer to now. And I went to March 22nd. Remember, I have a list that's several pages long of just the dates of where all these occurred. And I arbitrarily went to March 22nd, 2013. And that conjunction of Mars and Uranus was in Aries. And Aries is a sign that's associated with Mars. One might assume that there would be more violence or more physical outcome from that. I mean, what could be more physical than a president being assassinated? But what's crazy was from about March 18th through March 25th, there was a string. I mean, this is online. I use there's a number of sites, but I use a site, I think it's from the Information Please Almanac. And it just basically goes, what happened this month? And it has a list of relatively important events. And what happened within 4 days of this conjunction on March 22nd in 2013 was 98 people were killed and 248 injured across Iraq from a series of bombings and shootings. Next, a car bombing kills 10 people and injures 20 in Mogadishu, Somalia. Next, explosions killed 25 people at a bus park in Kano, Nigeria. Next, 16 people killed in mudslides in Rio de Janeiro. Next, 27 people and 14 are killed and 14 injured in a bus crash in Maharashtra, India. The day before, March 21st, 12 people killed and 30 injured by a car bombing in Peshawar, Pakistan. Again, next event, 24 people killed and 100 injured in a tornado in southern China. Next, 40, I mean, you get the idea here. This is all within like a 5-day period. And I, just out of curiosity, moved it a year ahead, a year back, a few days ahead, and a few days back. And I've never seen a string of events that close together. Then I brought it a little bit closer to home. And there was a conjunction on February 12th, 2019. And that was the day that the Mexican drug lord El Chapo was found guilty, and 100 hours of testimony in this case. And that was just another event that just coordinated exactly with that. And again, the other ones that I read that stood out were certainly violent, and but here is an example of tension being resolved in a different sort of way. And then we go to so there was Mars was in Aries and moved into Taurus on the afternoon of January 6th, 2021. Now, Uranus at that time was at 6 degrees of Taurus. So there was a good 5 degrees in between the two. But the event of the attack, insurrection on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021 happened like a trigger moment, the moment that Mars moved into Taurus and became within range of Uranus that was in Taurus already. And this because of the retrograde back and forth. Actually, the actual culmination of this, how do I want to say this? The perfection of the Mars-Uranus conjunction occurred on January 21st, which was the day that Biden was sworn in as president of the United States. So we just see patterns here. By the way, the last time that this occurred was on August 1st, 2022. And basically, that was when 23 people, well, actually, it was in the United States. I might have the number here. I didn't take complete notes on it. Now, there was 2 men that were found guilty of plotting to kidnap Michigan Governor Whitmer, whatever, Gretchen Whitmer. Again, something was resolved, but not necessarily violence, although there was some violence or looming violence prior to it. So what does this mean for now? I think that that July storm clouds are definitely on the horizon. Will the entire events be fulfilled right now or resolved? No. Obviously, what's happening not just with the Republican National Convention on July 15th, but also what's happening in the Democratic Party with the nomination. I have to say that many of you have heard me say this, but for about a year and a half now, I've been saying, I don't think either of these guys are going to be on the ticket. And of course, that's crazy. I mean, we're like a few months away. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. And in all honesty, that doesn't come from anything specific astrological. It's just this weird hunch that I've had. And there's so much astrological dynamic energy between now and November. I think that anyone who has a prediction as to what's going to happen is just making it up based either upon their illusions, fantasy, wishes, hopes, dreams, or their fears. That's it. That's the best we can do right now. But can you see in this chart this Mars alignment with Uranus that is exact on that day? Well, there's something else that's going on through this same period of time, and that is that if we back this up a few days, I'm looking here at Venus at almost 5.5 degrees of Leo. And I'm going to back this up a few days. And we can see that on July 10th, Venus is at 29 degrees of Cancer. Well, these lines in the center, many of you who are either practicing astrologers or serious students, you know that the lines in the center are based upon sacred geometry, what the ancients called aspects, what a musician would call chords, when two notes sound together in one way. And for example, the closer the aspect is, meaning the more in tune it is, the thicker the line. And we can see here these lines between the Sun at 19 Cancer and Venus at 29 Cancer, that they are very thick, and they're connected to Saturn at 19 Pisces, 19 Cancer, and Neptune at 29 Pisces, 29 Pisces, 20, and 29 Cancer. And when two planets are at the same degree, that's when they're particularly resonant. And those blue lines represent trines. That's 1/3 of a circle. It's an easy, smooth flow of energy. It's like an open circuit. It's like any of you who are musically inclined, it's like the open do, sol, you know, the 1 to 5 that you hear in Gregorian chants, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, do, sol, that whole open sound, that's like a trine. It's an open flowing energy. Now, what's happening here on the 10th is that the Sun is making a harmonious trine with Saturn. Saturn is the planet of structure, of stability, of make it real. And when the Sun trines Saturn, as it does for a day or two, twice a year on either side of that equilateral triangle, there's like a stability. I have a friend who used to call it a pause in the disaster. It's supposed to be funny. But it's like whatever's going on, it's like there's something that's a stable data, something happens that we can grab onto that's real. But the other thing that's exact on that same day is Venus is making that same harmonious trine to Neptune. And we haven't talked about Neptune. And I said earlier that I would say something about Neptune later. I think if I didn't say it, I said it to myself. Because Neptune is at an extreme position right now. All the outer planet, all the planets, the real planets, not the Sun and the Moon, meaning Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, Eris, Sedna, Makema, all the, whether you know their names or not, all the things that go around the Sun all go retrograde because the Earth moving around makes them look like they go forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward. Neptune is a 165-year cycle. And Neptune is an inch, no, it's a millimeter away from finishing an entire cycle and moving into 0 degrees of Aries. Remember, in astrology, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It defines the spring equinox. It's the beginning of the astrological or astronomical year. And Neptune right now is at 29 degrees and 55 minutes. Well, actually, that's where it will be on July 10th. But Neptune was moving direct, and it's now moving retrograde. However, it moves so slowly that we can move this all the way back to June 23rd, and Neptune was at 29 degrees Pisces and 55 minutes. In how many weeks? 3 weeks. It moves to 56 minutes, and then it begins its retrograde, but it's not changing. It's still at the same degree and minute, and it really holds that same position within 1/60th of a degree for like 3 weeks. Astrologers will say Neptune has turned retrograde. Neptune hasn't turned anything. It's just stopped. And it's not moving. What is Neptune? Neptune is the planet associated, well, the people in the 1800s said Neptune was the planet that was associated with being crazy. You know, psychos, lunatics, people in insane asylums, sicknesses, hospitals, bad endings, things that don't go right. We moderners, however, know that Neptune is associated with dreams and illusions and anything out beyond the boundaries of the three-dimensional world. And we forget that our ancestors just didn't have the same languaging and or tools that we have to go out there beyond Saturn, beyond what was real. I remember being in elementary school and learning about in library science or in library, the Dewey Decimal System, and that everything had their classifications in the library, and learning that everything that was written was, first of all, classified either as fiction or nonfiction. It's one or the other, period. Well, I would suggest that most of us spend most of our time reading stuff that is somewhere in between. We don't know. The line between fiction and nonfiction has grown soft. It's gone fuzzy. And Neptune is the culprit here. And without going too much further into this topic, the important thing to understand is that we are at the edge of a 165-year cycle where Neptune's going to go into Aries and things are going to change dramatically. In fact, over the next year or so, and I've talked about this some already, that if I move this to just going a year at a time and back it up, we can see here's Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And now I bring it to here and I see Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces. And then I move it ahead again and I can see that Uranus is gone from where it is now at 26 degrees of Taurus into 0 degrees of Gemini. Neptune has gone into 0 degrees, or actually by then, Aries, Saturn also, and Pluto. What this means is that Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus are all changing signs. These are all slow-moving planets. Saturn changes signs every 2.5 years. Uranus changes signs every 7 years. Neptune changes signs every 14 years. Pluto changes signs every 15 to 35 years. Its orbit is very elliptical, so it's very dramatic in the differences in the speed of motion. But when we come back to now, and we see Neptune so close to that change, the end of one cycle and the beginning of the other, and it turns retrograde 4 minutes, that's 1/15 of a degree away from being in a new cycle, and it backs up almost like, nope, can't go there yet. That adds to this whole feeling of tension and frustration that we are so feeling because we can't see around the bend, because Neptune didn't even quite get to that point. At least Pluto last year touched into Aquarius the week that ChatGPT went viral. I mean, that we got a flavor of what's around the bend from that, just one flavor. There's a lot more on that, of course. But Neptune being the planet of dreams, of illusion, of the perfection of aesthetic creativity. Neptune is the religious vision, it's transcendence. If Venus is love, as in, I love you, or you, or you. Neptune is love, capital L, capital O, capital V, capital E, agape, love. They're both about love, but Venus is personal, and Neptune is the spiritual connection with everything when the ego's illusion of separateness disappears or breaks down. So on July 10th, we have, oh, we're not here on July 10th. Get back to, we'll get there. Oh, we're at a year at a time, back to a day at a time. All right. So here on July 10th, we have the sun stabilizing with Saturn in a trine. At the same time, we have Venus at the very, very last degree of Cancer. Cancer is where the sun is. It's where the new moon was earlier today. Cancer is the sign of home, of family. The United States is a Cancerian born July 4th, 1776. we have a whole big thing around home and family and the self-protection and the whole idea of domestic tranquility in the Constitution. Cancer is about vulnerability and self-protection. Cancer is about caring, it's nurturing, it's associated with the moon. The moon is that which nurtures us. It's the physical body. It's what holds our self inward, so to speak. So we have Venus at the very last degree of Cancer. Kind of Venus in Cancer is Venus in Cancer is, if you really loved me, I wouldn't have to tell you what I need. You'd know. Because Venus in Cancer pulls inward and it works on emotional connection rather than verbal. But if we move this forward just a few hours, actually I'll move it forward a day, Venus from 29 degrees of Cancer moves into 0 degrees of Leo. This is like someone turning on the light switch. It goes from the moon, Cancer, to Leo, the sun. Outward, the sun's out. It's summer. Everything is on show. It's on display. The sun has this intention of lighting up the sky. I love there's a poem from it's a Sufi poem, and it says something like, the love between the sun, the love of the sun, how magnificent, it is. It lights up the entire world. I mean, it's that kind of feeling of that kind of outward expression. And when Venus moves from inward self-protective Cancer into expressive Leo, the energy is going to move outward. But as it moves into Leo, it immediately becomes opposite Pluto, which is still moving backwards towards Capricorn, but Venus opposing Pluto, Venus, the planet of love and speaking it out loud and stating its intention, is now opposite the Lord of Death, the darkness, the unconscious, the dark eros. In other words, this is Venus doing a dive deep into the mysteries. And so this is a very powerful, transformative couple of days right here. And it sets up, there's a lot more I could say about this chart, and I do in the monthly on YouTube. But what this does is this is setting up this release of tension that is happening from Mars moving closer and closer to Uranus, that actually gets there on the 14th, 15th, 16th. It's exact on the 15th. And in some ways, the other thing that's happening as we get closer and closer to the end of the Cancer season, the astrology seasons typically, or the signs, change around the 19th, 20th, 21st period of time. And the sun will move from Cancer into Leo on the 21st. We're going to move this ahead right there. It does it late in the day, so we see here on the 22nd, the moon the sun is in Leo. But if we back this up a day, the sun is making that same trine to Neptune, which is about the dreams and the fantasies and the illusions and the big love and the big misdirected love, because Neptune is, remember, illusions aren't wrong. Illusions are just something based upon a wish. What's the Disney? A dream is a wish your heart makes. Dreams come true. If we didn't dream, we wouldn't have this imaginative scaffolding that we then can use to build reality on. But not all dreams come true. So here we have the sun highlighting on the 22nd, on the 20th and 21st. The sun is highlighting this trine to Neptune, while Mars has just moved from Taurus into Gemini, highlighting its trine to Pluto. This is saying we're getting something from the darkness now that's important, that's real. Remember, the darkness, the hell realms, is the unconscious. This is the whole Freudian, Jungian, psychodynamic, inward explorations. All of this stuff is Plutonic. It's the hidden realms. And so this period of time from July 21st, when first Mars moves from determined I'm going to get there Taurus, into Gemini, well, maybe I should go this way and that way, or this way or that way, because Gemini is a bit more, it can handle the lack of singularity. It can handle the bifurcation and say, yeah, it's this and that. But at the same time, the sun, as it moves into Leo, will then move opposite Pluto. And again, this is an incredible facing of the hell realms, of the difficulty, of the hidden, of things that we don't want to see on the news, things that when we see, we may look the other way or turn it off and go, I know about it, I can't watch this, kind of a thing. And so this dance is going on all month. And what's significant, though, is that this Uranus and Mars are at a point where they're actually a release point. It's hard to see here. I think I actually can make this a little bit more obvious by going here, aspected points, and I don't want to dazzle you here with my footwork, but I'm just going to do this and make this so that we get rid of most of the lines there. And I'm not adding any lines, but what I want here is I want the line between Mars and Uranus and the Sun and Pluto and Neptune. That's enough. And we can see when we take out all the rest of the noise, we can see that the Sun is moving opposite, the Sun at 0 Leo is moving opposite to Pluto, but that Uranus and Mars, which by now are already four, almost 5 degrees apart, but they're still kind of in the same place in the sky, they're making harmonious trines, while the Sun is making a trine, they're making trines to Pluto, while the Sun's making a trine to Neptune, and then there's sextiles, which are like half trines all the way around. This is actually encouraging. There may just be something that flows out of this that gives us some sort of resolution or somewhere to go. Now, again, I'm not a political pundit. I'm not predicting the future. Well, I am predicting the future by saying this is where these planets are going to be. But I'm not saying what's going to happen, but I'm saying we have an opportunity here. We have a real opportunity. And let me go back and add all the rest of the noise, aspected points, and go back to that. The other piece of this is that, and my contract forbids me from talking about anything in August, but at the risk of getting fired or not paid. Oh, wait. No one's ever hired me and I don't get paid. I can do this then. Okay. That when we get to August, but before we go to August, let me just back this up just another couple of days here, because the other thing that's happening as the Sun is moving opposite to Pluto, this is that same chart. This is the 20th. And on the, let's go back to the 20th and let me move this forward an hour at a time. And watch the moon here. As the moon moves from Cancer, I'm sorry, the Sun is in Cancer at the very end of Cancer. And as the moon moves from 25 degrees of Capricorn into or toward Aquarius, it gets closer and closer to its opposition to the Sun. Remember, when the Sun and Moon are at the same place, that's a conjunction. When they're opposite one another, that's the full moon. And so right here, we can see that the Sun reaches, well, that's close enough. It's at about 3 in the morning on the 21st. The Sun is at 29 degrees and 9 minutes of Cancer. All right, we can make this exact. There we go. So at about 3:18 a.m., the moon at 29 degrees of Capricorn and 9 minutes is opposite the Sun at 20 degrees of Cancer, 9 minutes. You know, there's a new moon in each sign through the year and a full moon in each sign through the year, but our calendar's accurate, and occasionally we get 2 new moons or two full moons in the same sign. This technically is an astrological blue moon, because it's the second full moon in Capricorn. The first one was at the prior full moon to this. And yet why this is so important is that this full moon is occurring just within a degree or so of its alignment with Pluto. And so we're getting this whole piece of the full moon in Capricorn just hours before both the sun and the moon change signs. The moon changes signs first, lines up with Pluto, and that's followed on later that day on the 21st right there. The sun moves, it's actually early in the morning on the 22nd, the sun moves into Leo. But you can see that this Mars and Uranus are still part of the release because they're making these trines and sextiles to this. So I see this as an opportunity, although it's not without its tension and fraught with its complications. And again, we're just touching the surface here. But when we come back, I think the next first Friday, I think is August 2nd. We'll probably have a bit of a story to tell about what happened in July. However, we won't have the story yet of what happens in August. And I want to mention one thing about August because it convinces me that no one on the national level is using astrology. Because if they were, no one would have picked July 15th to be the opening of the Republican National Convention on the day when there's such a disruptive energy going on. Now, it may be that that convention is the disruptive energy. Again, we have to be careful about what we predict and how we think things will play out. But I want to look at the following full moon, which is the full moon in Aquarius, which is on August 19th. Does anyone know what's happening on August 19th? It's the Democratic National Convention on a full moon that is not a pretty picture. All I can say is that if I were retained by the National Committee, the Democratic National Committee, I would say, oh, you're having a convention this summer. Let me look. You know what? I don't care when you do it. Just don't do it on August 18th, 19th, or 20th. Other than that, you'll be okay. And why? Look at these thick red lines. Because we have this full moon with Mercury retrograde conjuncting the sun. We have both the sun, Mercury, and the moon being squared 90 degrees to what? Uranus. What's Uranus? It's shock, surprise, revolution, change, destruction, cataclysm. It's also intellectual breakthrough. It is freedom. It is the voice of the collective. This is not a negative. Well, it depends, but Uranus in astrology, the 90-degree angle is the most conflictive angle. The opposition is tension. We have the tension from the full moon opposing Mercury, communication in Leo. Leo, it wants to say it. It wants to express it. It wants to be dramatic. It wants to, with intention. Leo is fixed fire. Fire is intuition. Intuition means you don't make a thought, you just burn. You just do it. Yeah, I say burn as if it's negative. A fire, in order to stay alive, doesn't think, well, I should go this way, not that way. It just does it. And so we have this intense Mercury lined up with the sun, with the moon in Aquarius. The moon in Aquarius, that's the sign of the people. That's the collective. And Uranus in Taurus, the stability, the determination of Taurus squaring that. This is Chicago 68. I don't know. On top of that, we have Venus opposed very closely, Venus opposed Saturn, and they're being squared by Mars and Jupiter. And again, I'm not going to say a whole lot more about this right now. I'll drill down on this quite a bit on my August forecast. And certainly next month, this will be something that we can talk about. but it's intriguing to me how we humans, sometimes without the use of astrology, just set ourselves up with the maximum stupidity just for making things happen. So we shall see. Did you have a question before I cut you off? Speak up.
Uranus, could you also call it is it truthful to call it the planet of balance because of its position?
The question is, for those of you online, can you call Uranus the planet of balance because of how it's the only planet that North Pole isn't up and down, it faces the sun, and it revolves like a bowling ball. I mean, it's a whole different thing. Its moons actually move retrograde also. No. Uranus is the antithesis of balance, because you might say, well, on a good day, Uranus will create balance as an after effect. If you could argue that point, and I probably wouldn't argue against you. But I might just for the fun of it. No, because I am an Aries and I do like arguing. Uranus, Libra is the sign of balance. Venus is the planet that seeks harmony and nice balance. Uranus does not seek balance. It seeks the explosive resolution of tension. Now that may lead to balance ultimately, but that's my response. I don't know whether, that's my best shot. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts? This is your chance. Yes, speak up, please.
Yeah, isn't a Mars-Uranus conjunction where it trumps Mars and ascendant and opposite fighting?
No. I didn't. Repeat the whole thing again, if you would, please.
Okay, so the Mars-Uranus conjunction, that's where it trumps Mars, right? Donald Trump.
Okay, so the question is about the degree of the Mars-Uranus conjunction, and there's actually several things that are significant about it. One of them is that it is actually a strong point in both Biden's and Trump's chart. And I'm not going to drill down any more on that right now. I don't want to my goal here is not political, but it is very close to squaring 90 degrees to Trump's Mars. It is also, and maybe more importantly, and I think I mentioned this on my monthly, and there's a link to a talk that I did on the monthly. I think it might be buried in the comments. But this 26.5 degrees of Taurus is a very significant point, because the ancients didn't just look at the planets and the signs. They also looked at the stars. And when planets lined up with different stars, the stars actually had characteristics themselves. In fact, today's new moon is aligned with the fixed star Sirius. And that's not Sirius like in Sirius and Roebuck or come on, get serious. It's Sirius. And Sirius is often considered to be the center of what's called a globular cluster, something that you've probably never thought about. Stars don't just exist dispersed evenly throughout the Milky Way galaxy. They exist in clusters of 5, 10, 20, 50 stars in a close area. When I say close, I still mean, tens or hundreds of light years apart, but not tens of thousands of light years apart. It turns out that Sirius is the center sun of this little globular cluster that our sun is in. It's like the sun of our suns. The Egyptians knew this. Actually, the Dogons in northern Africa have a 60-year renewal that they've been doing for centuries. That takes 10 years in preparation. And every 60 years, they go through this thing that's years in the making that has to do with their worship of Sirius. And Sirius is the dog star, and these are the Dogons. Where does that connect? I don't know. All right. But it wasn't until 1957 that we discovered that Sirius is actually a binary star. And Sirius B revolves around the big star, Sirius A, and that Sirius B takes 60 years to go around once. All right. When planets line up, and Sirius is an important star. It's spiritual. It's affirming. It's a very life-giving star. Yeah.
Cam Dogon tribe knew about that star before we did.
Oh yeah, that's why that's right. That was their worship of that star. They knew, and they believed that we, as life, came from that star.
The dwarf star that's revolving around it that we didn't discover.
We couldn't discover until 1957. It was.
So what's the difference between Uranus and Pluto, not Pluto and Pluto, Uranus and Mars being conjunct in Taurus versus another sign?
Sure. So planets themselves are like energies. They're the animating forces. Mars wants to create boundary, and Mars wants to do stuff. Mars, whether it's angry or just construction, Mars wants to do stuff. That's its energy. Venus wants to love. Uranus wants to break through boundaries. The sign they're in is kind of like what clothing they're wearing. It's maybe even like what culture they come from. So that Mars in a warring culture will always be angry, but Mars in a culture that maybe is more matriarchal, maybe more oriented towards constructing homes and buildings. So the Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, Taurus is a sign that is determined to follow through and to get to where it's going. It's practical. It doesn't move very easily, but once it's moving, it doesn't stop very easily. So I think that the Mars-Uranus in Taurus is really, it's about the security and about those things which are very real in our world. Right now, that's the only one we need to worry about, or to think about. But any of these planets kind of take on different energies depending upon what sign they happen to be in. And like when Mars moves from determined Taurus into more scattered and adaptable and changeable Gemini, some might say, well, Mars is less effective at getting the job done. And someone else say, yeah, but it's more capable of doing a lot of things. So it's all just how we, the value judgments that we have. Did that answer that a little bit? Okay. Before we break, we'll take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back and we'll look at some charts. These will be here on the table, and I'll have a hat on the table. If you've never had your chart done and you want to be in the hopper, fill out your name, your birth date, birth time, birthplace. Make sure you circle AM or PM. I'll draw 3 out of the hat, and we'll look at those live for those of you who want to stay for that. For those of you who don't, this is your moment to leave. Also, make sure you put your email on it in case there's some reason for me to get a hold of you. I will also send you an email and give you a link if you want to stay on my email list. If not, that's totally cool. Yeah.
What do you use as your ascendant for the U.S.?
The question is, what do I use as my ascendant for the U.S.? My short answer is that we don't know. I use a Gemini ascendant usually, mostly. It's a Sagittarius ascendant. And the question really is, was the United States born at the day of the Declaration of Independence on July 2nd, or was it born the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, or was it born a decade later at the First Continental Congress when we adopted our Constitution? It's hard to say. I mean, countries are complicated, but most people use what's called the Sibley chart, which is the afternoon of July 4th, 1776.
The Sagittarius.
Sagittarius rising. Okay, so we'll come back and we'll do that. 2 things. One is I always give this little pitch. If you want to support Soul Food, buy shit here instead of at the big store down the block and around the corner. We all have birthdays and gifts that we need for people. There's a lot of cool stuff here. So support your local vendors. And also the bar will be closing shortly. So if you want a last drink, make sure you get it. And lastly, I want to make one other announcement, and that is there's a number of organizations in the astrology world that are local, regional, and national, even international. One of those organizations is called the NCGR, the National Council for Geocosmic Research. It's basically a fancy name for we study astrology. But they didn't want astrology in their name back then for real reasons. Just, okay. So NCGR has local chapters all over the world. I've been a member of NCGR for decades. They have national conferences. They also have probably one of the best systems of learning astrology and not so much the learning, but testing that if someone says there's 4 levels of NCGR certification, and if someone says I'm an NCGR level 4, you know what they know. Doesn't mean that they're a good counselor, but you know what they know astrologically. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that there is an NCGR being started here in Seattle. Is Rene here?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, okay. Do you want to say a word about this?
There's like need to, last I talked with Anastasia and Linda Kubota, we're trying to get 10 members because we need that as a threshold for the chapter. So I don't know if we've reached that yet at this point.
No, I think they're close, and I definitely will be. I am an NCGR member, so I will transfer my membership from the national to here. But if you're interested, talk to Rene. Again, the bylaws of NCGR is that for a chapter to exist, there needs to be a minimum of 10 members. So they're just putting this together. It'll meet somewhere here, either on the east side or in Seattle. I don't think they know yet. I'm not sure. But there will be monthly programs, and it's just another organization to support, and a good one. I will support them. And if you want to join that, you can even, if you don't have Rene's contact information, you can send it to me. And Rene, for that matter, if you or Anastasia give me your email addresses, I don't need it right this second. I will put it on the comments of the live feed once it goes live, once it's posted on YouTube. So that's it for now. I will see you on August 2nd, all stars considered. And be safe out there. It's crazy out there, and it's going to stay crazy for a while. And of course, what that means more than ever, it means it's okay to think cosmically, but please, please, please act locally. Do what you need to do in your own lives. We'll see you here in about 10 minutes. Thank you. And for those of you online, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And for those of you online, you can keep it active. We'll be back shortly, but we're going to turn the mic off. If you want to chat, the comment room will still be open. All right. Welcome back. For those of you who are here, and for those of you who are here but not here. So I need to start off and say something that before we get into charts, this will just take me a couple of minutes, but I did this whole lead up in the first part this evening, and I never delivered the punchline. So I need to just step back a moment. And I was talking about the fixed stars and I mentioned how this new moon today, on July 5th, was conjunct the fixed star Sirius. But what I didn't mention, the reason why I brought that up, is the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And this was in response to, was it you, Rene, who asked the question about the relationship between this and Biden and or Trump's chart? Yeah. So what I didn't mention was the fact that the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which occurs at about 25.5 degrees of, let's see if I can make that come back up here for a real quick second. No, I'm not, hold on, I can do this. Can we share the screen again, Sam, or can you do that for me?
You're going to have to present again. It looks like it closed.
Present, share screen.
Then every entire screen.
Oh, yeah.
Allow.
So before, when we were talking about the Mars-Uranus conjunction, on the 15th, it occurs at 26.5 degrees, roughly, of Taurus. And there is a fixed star at 26.5 degrees of Taurus that is incredibly significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, this star was the star that Ptolemy wrote was the most treacherous star in the sky. It's a star that is associated with how do we say this? Decapitation. That's how we say it. The star's name is Algol, A-L-G-O-L, and Algol is the root, the etymological root of things like ghoul. So something that's ghoulish is actually coming from Algol. Algol in the sky represents the beheaded Medusa. And Medusa, as you may know from mythology, and I'm going to do this very, very short version of this. And again, in the comment, in the description, I will add a link to a short cosmic quickie I did a few years ago on the fixed star Algol and its importance in the charts of Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, and as crazy as this is, Al Gore. Algol. So I'll tell you that story, but there's two different cosmic quickies, and that stands alone. And someone sent me a post on that first one I did on Algol and said, "Oh, I thought you were talking about Al Gore." And I did as any good astrologer would do. I said, I wonder what Al Gore's chart's like. And I saw that he had Venus conjunct that 26 Taurus conjunct Algol. And there's a story there that I'm not going to tell now. The story that I am going to tell is that mythologically, we know Medusa as being this gorgon with the hair of snakes that was so horrific that when anyone looked at her, they turned to stone. Are you familiar with that story roughly? Well, that's not the real story. That's the patriarchal version whitewash of the story. The fact is that Medusa was the first documented Me Too victim. Medusa, well, okay, so in the sky, Medusa is the beheaded Venus. I'm sorry, Medusa is the beheaded, do this again. Algol is the beheaded Medusa. And the hero warrior Perseus actually slayed Medusa by decapitating her. The problem was that people who tried, heroes who tried to slay Medusa couldn't, because as soon as they looked at her, they turned to stone. And so by using a mirror and this special sword, and anyhow, Perseus became this hero because he slayed the Gorgon, the horrific creature Medusa. So who was Medusa? Medusa was actually a virgin priestess in Aphrodite's temple. And she had beautiful, beautiful hair. She was allegedly like the most beautiful of all the priestesses. And Neptune had the hots for her. And Neptune pursued her, and she always shooed him away and pushed him away and so on. But one time Neptune was coming after her particularly heavy-handed, and Medusa ran into the temple because she knew that Aphrodite would save her and help her. Except Aphrodite wasn't there and Neptune raped her. The result of that rape, incidentally, was the flying horse, whom I think was Pegasus, the flying horse. But Aphrodite comes back, and they're just in this kind of post-coital meltdown, or whatever you want to call it, and Aphrodite is furious. And what she does is she does as anyone who was sane at that time would have done, and that is she takes it out on Medusa, because what's she going to do? Blame a god? Neptune's a god. And so she basically puts this curse on Medusa that makes her hair, because that was what she was vain about, so horrific that no man would ever approach her again. So when Ptolemy said that the fixed star Algol was the most treacherous star in the sky, and Algol is associated with decapitation and not good things often. However, it's changed over a period of time, because it turns out that the horrific part of Algol was due to the suppression of the feminine voice. And so it would make sense that it was considered to be horrific by Ptolemy, who lived at the height of the patriarchal development of the, pre-Greek, period of time. And so the whole myth of that kind of has this little bit of a twist. And there certainly was some intrigue about Algol being so strong in Donald Trump's chart and in Nancy Pelosi's chart, and now with the Mars-Uranus conjunction that's conjunct Algol. We'll see. It's just another twist in the plot. So we'll see what happens. So thank you for reminding. Who is it that reminded me? Thanks. Okay. All right. So we got 3 names. We'll go through these pretty quickly. Remember, these are not meant to be quote unquote real readings. They're flavors, tastes of what one could glean by looking at a chart. Obviously, none of these charts have been entered before, nor do I know, the charts of any of these people. I'll be looking at them at the first time, as you will be at the same time. And if I choose you, the requirement is that you be honest. I mean, if there's something that you don't want to say in front of a whole group, that's understandable. Say, I don't want to say it. But the more you interact, the more you give us, the more useful it is for us. And although you might feel like you're special, like you've been selected, like you won a lottery, we don't give a damn. It's about us. It's not about you. I don't really mean that. It's about all of us. All right, so let me enter the first chart, and away we go. The first chart that I will be entering, by the way, I blindly picked one, and 2 other people picked other ones here. And the first chart is Teresa. Teresa, born 10/22/69. Teresa. All right. Let's get Teresa entered. Teresa. Oh, that's all backwards. Teresa, Teresa. And I always put an SF for soul food after these, so I know where these came from. 10/22/69. 10/22/69. And 10:02 p.m. 10:02 p.m. and Livingston, Montana. That'll almost work. Let's try that again. There we go. Excuse me. And Teresa, tell us a little bit about your relationship with astrology. Do you know your chart a little bit?
A little bit. I'm beginning to see it.
Okay. So when I look at your chart, the first thing I notice is a whole bunch of planets. Does this look familiar to you? Do you have Cancer rising?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at your chart, the first thing that I notice is a whole bunch of planets at the bottom of the chart, and most of them are in Libra. Uranus, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and the Sun. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets, including the Sun, in Libra. And then we have a couple of planets, the Moon and Chiron, in the opposite sign of Aries. Now, when we look at charts, often we see a pattern, and your chart is kind of like a seesaw, meaning that there's planets on both sides of the charts, but a true seesaw chart, and these chart patterns were actually developed by an astrologer named Mark Edmund Jones. And the true seesaw chart would not have these two planets here in between. They would be strictly on either side. But there's enough of a statement here that leads me to believe that this self-other Aries, Moon in Aries, lined up with Chiron, the original mentor teacher who taught from a wound that he had early on, and that with the Moon in Aries, there's something about reacting from that point of yourself, who you are, your own perspective, wanting to react in a way that is in the moment, is now, because when you react, there is that sense of suddenness and immediacy, urgency. And yet, with the Sun and all these other planets in Libra, there's always the sense of the self in relationship with something else, with the other, inside, outside, self and other. So I think that this is a large piece of this chart. And yet the interesting thing is that Mars in Capricorn, and remember, Mars is the warrior planet. It's the planet that we use to define our boundaries, to do things. Mars is the planet of doing. Mars is at home in Aries. And so with your Moon in Aries, we would look to Mars to see how it is you act on your feelings. And Mars in Capricorn is exalted, meaning every planet has a home sign, but every planet also has a sign where it likes being better than any other sign than when it's not at home. It's like if you're at home, you're the king or queen of your own castle. But if you go to your best friend's house who lives on the other side of the country that you haven't seen in a few years, when you go there, you're not at home, but you're treated like royalty. So Mars loves being in Capricorn because it finishes what it starts. And Mars in Capricorn really takes a little bit of the pressure off of this whole kind of polarity of self versus other. And it's intriguing to me that the closest aspects here are an alignment within 1 degree of Venus and Uranus. And we talked earlier about Uranus being the kind of breakthrough, kind of the radical, the revolutionary. And with Venus at home, because Venus is at home in Libra, Venus at home in Libra lined up with Uranus is a very different flavor than other people's Venus in Libra, which is more just about the sweetness of a relationship or the dance between making things balanced. And here's the balanced thing that you asked about Uranus before, because Venus in Libra has this aesthetic sense of what goes well with what, and therefore they tend to be artists or interior designers or landscape designers or even counselors or diplomats, because they're always working at making the relationship work. However, not you. Or at least maybe to some extent not you, because your Venus so close to Uranus tells me that there's an attraction to disrupting things a little bit. That, or whether it's you being the disruptor or you simply liking people who stir up excitement and adrenaline and that noise. Again, that Venus-Uranus is pretty closely opposite the moon in Chiron. There's something here about what happens when things are out of whack, out of balance, that allow you to feel the adrenaline that in some way is exciting. Although there's so much other energy in Libra that it really comes back to still that finding that point of balance. And the Mars in Capricorn doesn't act as impulsively as the moon feels. It will act out of a sense of, there's a lot of your chart is about strategy. And in fact, with Cancer rising, Cancer being the sign of the moon, the nurturing, the holding energy in, this is a bit, I always call the Cancer rising people, people who are wearing Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. It's like people don't see you unless you want them to. And it's really easy to be invisible with Cancer rising. And if someone says, oh, wait a minute, were you just going to say something? No. No, it looked like you had, no, I'm okay. And it can be from a point of shyness, but more often it's from a perspective of the need for self-protection, of feeling vulnerable and wanting to hold energy in. Now, it's interesting because of the Mars in Capricorn in the 7th house, the house of relationships, and the moon and Chiron so high, upwards to the top of the chart in the 10th house, there is something here about projecting this onto others and using it as some sort of healing, either for yourself or for them or teacher. I don't know. Does any of this make any sense to you? Got any feedback for us?
Yeah. I definitely a lot of struggle between taking care of myself and helping others. And I'm a counselor, so that's
All right, let the record reflect, for those of you who are here but not here, that Teresa just admitted to being a counselor and having that issue of the struggle between self and other. And I would imagine that one of the strengths that you bring to counseling is the fact that you've had to do that deeper dive in your own world, because often that the Chiron as the wounded healer basically is that part of us that feels the wound, but it's not a wound we can heal in ourselves. It's a wound that we can ameliorate, make feel okay by healing it in others, which is why we then do the work with others that we're really doing on ourselves, that actually can be very potent and very powerful, because it really gives you a sense of authority in that work that you do. And with the moon, again, there's many types of counselors, but I wouldn't be surprised if the orientation of a lot of the work that you did, was relationship work and or relationship and even some trauma work of that sort. Not, just because, the Venus-Uranus together is that sense of sudden change, of the breakthrough. And so, yeah, that's kind of my opening thought there. There are other things, these big fat green lines, without getting over technical, they're quincunxes. They're 5/12 of a circle, and they're an aspect or a relationship that often has to do with an irritation that never is resolved, but we get good at going through the motions. And so there's the sense here of the Venus and Uranus, quincunx to Saturn in Taurus. Remember, Taurus is the sign that wants stability and lack of change if things are well, and so there's something here about the discomfort, between the part of you that wants to kind of blow things up and nuke them and make changes for your sense of freedom, and the part of you that really wants the stability of just having something, or that holds its own and just stays, that lasts. So that's all food for thought. I would imagine also that over the next few years, that your life is going to go through some pretty major transitions, that you may already in your mind have ideas as to what they may be, although I don't think you can have concrete plans around how to make that happen. Why I'm saying that is, you remember earlier I said that Neptune was at 29 degrees and 56 minutes of Pisces, just barely, but not quite into Aries. Well, every 165 years, Neptune lines up with every planet in our chart. And the last time that Neptune moved into Aries and lined up with Teresa's moon was 163 years ago. And so over the next couple of years, as all these planets are changing signs, all these planets meaning Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus, they're all doing it in ways that activate your moon and your Chiron. And so I would imagine on some level, whether it's your work, your career, your life in some ways is really going to take off in a way that you can't imagine. Or maybe you do imagine. Do you have any sense of that coming?
I would love to become an astrologer and combine it with my company.
And again, for those of you online, Teresa said, that she'd love to become an astrologer and combine it with her counseling work. And I would basically say, go for it. And the timing in your life is really right. You actually have Saturn over the next year joining up with your moon also, because Saturn is now moving through Pisces, and it's giving you authority at work, but it's also ending a cycle that in some ways began about 14, 15 years ago. That in some way, those things that you set in motion, let's say 14 years ago, it has come to fruition, and you can't climb the same ladder any higher. And so there's this thing of consolidation and kind of, what am I going to do where I am, rather than how am I going to get to someplace new. So thank you. All right. Teresa, 1 down, 2 to go. Lara, hi. All right, let's get Lara. You say Lara.
Yes.
Does everyone say Laura and you hate it?
My family actually calls me Laura, and I don't like it, yeah.
Yeah.
You pronounce my husband like
That's why. Oh, never mind. Okay, how come? All right. I was going to say something nasty about families in general, but I shouldn't, because it's a family holiday weekend, and I actually just got back from visiting, when I was out east, my daughter and my older brother and younger sister, and so my family is great. But I can't say that it always was when I was growing up, and it wasn't because of them. It might not have even been because of my parents. It might just have been because of me. All right. I hate that part. All right. And we have an 11/29/67. 11/29/67. And that's in Oakland. Oh, we need a time, 9:04 a.m. 9:04 a.m. And that's a land of oak. Oak land. CA. And Lara, Jesus, sorry about that. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with astrology, if you would.
I would say that I'm really interested in it. I'm not a student. I consume a lot of it for a while.
I'm not sure why I got
I
two.
have a lot to learn.
Yeah, well, we all do. All right, so interesting no, wait a minute. Something's not right here. October 22nd, 69, and November 29th, 67. Well, this is intriguing because remember I said it takes Mars about 2 years to go around once? Well, first of all, look at the shape of your chart, Lara, compared to Teresa's chart. All right, so Teresa has all these planets in Libra opposite Aries and other, but with Mars in Capricorn kind of hanging out in between. You have basically most of your planets clustered on one side of the zodiac with a couple in opposition, Saturn and Chiron. But again, look at that Mars kind of hanging out as in a way, as both the annoying planet and the saving grace. Very different charts, but it's interesting that you were born almost 2 years apart and that Mars as a 2-year cycle is back in the same place as it was. The important thing in your chart, there's a number of important things. First of all, you are Sagittarius. Sagittarius, I'm trying to get the name of that sign changed to Exaggitarius. Because Sagittarius is related to Jupiter, and Sagittarians make everything look bigger, better, and more. Now, it's good news, bad news. I mean, it's Sagittarius, I like to say, is the only sun sign that doesn't cast a shadow. And of course, I'm kidding, but it's, the shadow represents our darker side and the unconscious, the work that we need to do on ourselves. And Sagittarians just tend to be so optimistic that often they are in a bit of denial about their shadows. Now, I would suggest that that doesn't include Lara. Why? Because her moon is in Scorpio, which casts a shadow that's larger than some of the other moons. And so, and it's not just her moon in Scorpio at 9 degrees of Scorpio, but there's also a Mercury conjunction to Neptune, all in Scorpio, which kind of really tells me that although Lara is an optimistic, adventurous Sagittarian by heart, the fact is that she often feels much more intense, volatile, passionate, deeper, and the imagination, why imagination? Mercury lined up with Neptune. It's the imagination where the imagination meets words, that somehow it's the intellectual, investigator that wants to find meaning in the mysteries that may not describe them really well in words, but the feeling part is very important. And then we go to this Capricorn rising with the Mars in Capricorn. And here we say that the rising sign is kind of our interface with the outer world. You know, that the Emerald Tablet, which was allegedly written by the giver of truth back in Egypt, who some people refer to as Thoth or Toth, and some people referred to as Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes is Greek for Mercury, which is Latin for the messenger of the heavens, language. And Hermes Trismegistus means Hermes, the 3 times great. Now, whether this character ever lived or not, don't know, but did leave behind this stone that is referred to as the Emerald Tablet, which includes in its opening the following words that most astrologers know well. And the words begin, as above, so below. But what most people then don't realize is that it continues, as above, so below. The within of things is as the without of things. Why am I saying this here? Well, it's not saying, as we like to think, oh, as above, so below, the planets make us do it. It's saying that as within, the within is as the without. There is no difference. The inside and the outside, according to the Emerald Tablets, are one. Hindu tradition calls this qualified non-dualism. It's the illusion is there's a me and a you. The illusion is there's an internal psychological, microcosmic, subatomic, metaphysical realm, and an external cosmological, planetary, galactic, cosmic realm. But the two are one and the same. Now, with Mercury lined up with Neptune, there's this sense of the dreams inform that. You are informed of that. And with the Sun in Sagittarius, there's maybe even a wanting to adventure into those realms to learn more, whether you travel physically or metaphysically. There's this traveler, so to speak, that wants to learn to grow. But with the Capricorn rising, the as above, so below, the within and the without, which are one and the same, the rising sign or the ascendant is kind of like where our soul is nailed to the three-dimensional world. It's the interface point between the inner and the outer. And for you, that's Capricorn. Capricorn's key planet is Saturn. And we look at your chart, and Saturn is in Aries, kind of pushing you. Aries, again, wants to go to the new. It has that adventure, but Saturn goes, don't go too far, pull back just at the right amount of time. There's a part of you with the Sun trine Saturn. You see that thick blue line there? I talked about that as an upcoming aspect. The Sun will trine Saturn. And I said, this is stability. And you have that in your life, regardless of what kind of internal turmoil, volatility, emotional intensity. There's a part of you still that presents in the outer world as very stable, very reliable. And people who know you probably know your volatility and your turmoility. What's the word? Termility. No, I just made that word up. But it's an interesting dichotomy between that part of you which casts no shadow or would normally be in denial of shadow, what you present to people as the reliable, I'll get there, with Mars in Capricorn saying, I finish what I start. And yet that Scorpio moon, the other side of Mars, being internal and deep and maybe more passionate, but not always expressing that on the surface because of the need to protect. And also a need of, when that Scorpio energy is expressed on the surface all the time, you're probably with friends as a kid and you're hanging out on the playground, and one by one your friends say, God, I didn't realize it was so late, I gotta go. Because there's a part of you that has learned not to be so intense with everyone who can't deal with that intensity. I call that going there. You have a chart that it looks like you're very comfortable here in this world doing what you're doing, but you go there. And people who don't go there, can't go there, or won't go there, basically don't hang out with that part of you. So you've probably learned over the years to not bring that part of you out in certain relationships. So you're nodding yes, I'm assuming. That's an oh yeah, not just a yeah. Yeah, and so what's the creative part? What's the dance with imagination? What's the, is there a spiritual thing? Is there an attraction to fantasy, to fiction? What's the?
Yeah, I would not say it's definitely a spiritual thing. It's not fantasy or fiction. I really do dream it, and I tell people, I said, I feel like I see things and I'm trying to translate it. And I do that a lot, and sometimes it's a little futuristic, at times, but that's, yeah, I'm a big dreamer as far as. I would
imagine that not only are you a big dreamer, that Sagittarius part of you, it's interesting because it's so wired to Saturn, meaning that there's some stability, but it's also quite wired in that red line that's square to Jupiter, and that Jupiter is the key planet of Sagittarius. And I imagine that you've had to struggle or learn how not to overdo or overamp or or overindulge or whatever you want to put after the word over, because Jupiter is expansive. And I would also wonder what it is that you've done as your mission, your life, your career, whatever you call that, with Venus and the south node of the moon on the midheaven high up in the chart, which again would lead me to think that there was something here that either was relationship or oriented or counseling oriented or go between or involving somehow this relationship between self and other, whether it be, artistic or physical or metaphysical.
Yeah. So is that, yes, I'm actually created a nonprofit and I work with alternative practitioners. And so that's what I'm doing right now. It's really creating a support system and working with alternative practitioners and that type of thing. It's pretty mission driven.
So Lara said that she's created a nonprofit and works with alternative practitioners. And I would imagine that with the Venus in Libra so high in the chart, so close to your midheaven, which is often our mission statement, that in some ways you become either a nurturing point or a financial point or something with Venus involved that kind of allows you to be that go-between. But I would also imagine that point sometimes is a bit frustrating. There's things about it that either are annoying or it doesn't work or if things don't fit in. And the reason why I'm saying that, again, are these green lines, these quincunxes that connect that Venus to other points in the chart. And it's also, there's a part of your chart that would suggest to me that part of why you do this mission is you're good at it. It's almost like you've done it before in some past lives or earlier in this life. It's like a natural thing. And yet there's part of your soul's mission statement that really has to do with more doing your own inner work. Yeah, okay. So that's what stands out for me as I look at your chart, and I'm just trying to see if anything else comes to mind. With Jupiter, I would imagine that going back to May, June, as Jupiter moved in the sky from Taurus into Gemini and moved exactly opposite your sun, there may have been a few days or weeks of like big opportunities, whether they actually manifest or manifested yet, but certainly things came to fruition on some level. Anything strike from that period of time? Over the last month or two.
There's been some shifts, definitely feeling less of a constriction.
And that would be Jupiter. That would be Jupiter stuff, less of a constriction. All right. Thank you. All right, that's Lara, 2 out of 3. And next we have Rene. Rene, who asked the question. Hey, Rene.
Hey.
Hey, you got tagged. All right, let's get Rene entered and. Come on. 10, 20, 53. 10, 20, 53. At 9:30 a.m. in Montevideo. Excuse me. My Spanish is faltered. So you are Uruguay. You are. Was that close? Yep, I did it. And Rene, 27, almost 28 degrees Sagittarius rising?
Yep.
All right. And tell us a little bit about your relationship with astrology.
I get into astrology in 1982 and kind of practically dropped everything I was doing to get into it. Learned how to do charts by hand. And then, after just a couple of years ago, I was using my family and friends as guinea pigs. And when people started asking me to do their charts, I just charged like $15 or something. And when I moved to Seattle in 1996, I met a guy who was reading at the store. And then by early 1997, he split, and he left me off. He had a disagreement with the store owner, so I became the astrologer.
So I'm interrupting you because I can, and because people online probably can't hear you. So point is that you've been doing astrology for a while, and you actually do readings, and so you're a bit familiar with astrology as a practitioner. And when I look at your chart, the first thing I notice is compared to the other charts that we've seen, the planets are spread around in kind of a lot more areas, which would lead me to believe that Rene's the kind of person that has things going on in different areas of his life, rather than clustered really tightly in certain areas. However, in 1952-53, there was a lineup of Saturn and Neptune, which is actually happening again next year. It happens about, every 35 years, something like that. That Rene was born with the sun right in between Neptune and Saturn. And because we know Saturn moves faster than Neptune, it's at higher degree, we know that the exact conjunction between Saturn and Neptune already occurred, but it's almost like Rene was born at a point where the sun right in the middle is pulling both of those in. And so even as a Libra, Rene very likely is more spacey, dreamy, imaginative, in the creative, with the Neptune so close to the sun, and yet has always to be able to do something with it to make it real, because Saturn is the planet of contraction and authority and make it real, the stability part. And so it's almost like, as Rene goes through life, when planets move through his chart, as a planet moves into Libra, it's going to first line up with Venus. I love this, therefore I want to pursue it. To then it lines up with Neptune, and it becomes part of the dream, part of the spirit, part of the sense of what the magic is. And then it lines up with the sun, and it becomes part of the vitality, the center of his being. But ultimately it ends up with Saturn, meaning it has to be turned into something real. That although there's certainly dreaminess and a spiritual lean here, it's in some ways, I think that part of you might be the part of you that makes you crazy. I don't mean clinically crazy, because we can see how close by degree the Neptune squaring or being squared by Uranus. Uranus at 23 degrees and 4 minutes, Neptune at 23 degrees and 45 minutes. They are within the same degree. And it's in some ways, the Neptune part of all of this is the dream and the fantasy. And then the Uranus basically says, that's disruptive. And so the question then becomes, how does Rene take that disruptive energy and turn it into something that actually is part of his mission, part of who he is? The fact that the nodal axis here is part of this, that's often having to do with the soul's purpose, you might consider. And all these planets, Neptune, the sun, and Saturn, are all 90 degrees to that nodal axis, which suggests that this lifetime for Rene is a chance to kind of make it right, whatever that means, but to do do things that are important. And the other thing is that in the degrees here, the sun is at 26 degrees of Libra, and it's harmonized trine, thick blue line again, to 26 degrees of Gemini, where Jupiter is. And so in a way, this is the part of you that needs to learn, needs to grow, probably does that in work or other areas of your work. There has to be some sort of expansive, something that is Jupiterian, whether it's teaching. What'd you do before you kind of focused more on astrology?
Just had different jobs. I was in college, kind of with it for a couple of years, and but the astrology and tarot cards, learning that kind of pulled it off together.
So, but there's, and again, Jupiter and Gemini, which is where Jupiter is now. So we know you're coming into what we would call a Jupiter return every 12 years, just like a birthday is a solar return. And the United States of America is experiencing its Pluto return. Rene, over this next year, will experience a Jupiter return and probably could go back in his life in 12-year increments and see what came into his life that was new, big, kind of expansive at that point. And so that's just another interesting little piece here. Also, with the Jupiter so close to the descendant, the ascendant is where the sun rises. The descendant is where the sun sets. And in some ways, it's the descendant that connects us in relationships. It's the projection point, someone might say. And so with Jupiter so close to that, and with all these trines to the Neptune, Sun, and Saturn, one might imagine that Rene has gains more than some people do from relationships, whether it's individual, marriage, friendship, work relationships, but there's something about that connection with how other people are the motivation or the instigation for the growth in your life, whether it be a teacher or a friend or someone. Does that ring true for you at all?
Yeah, well, the last Jupiter return, going into my 7th house, I got together with a woman I married.
Okay, so again, for those of you online that maybe couldn't hear that, Rene said that at the last Jupiter return, he met someone who he later married, and so certainly that's part of that. Yeah, that's fine. One other thing I would just point out here also is that the moon toward the end of Pisces, which is where Neptune has been hanging out. So we might suggest, this might suggest that for the past couple of years, Rene has been at a place in his life where there's more of that kind of Neptune dreaming, whether it's your own personal dreams or whether it's how they're manifesting in your world. With Neptune at the latter degree, right now it's still only 1 degree away at the 29 degrees of Pisces, that this may have been a period of a year or two or 3 of having that whole influence of whether it be spiritual or dreams or creativity, maybe more so than at other times in your life even. Is that something? Yeah, maybe. Oh yeah, we get. All right, and and unless you have something else, I mean, there's a lot of other things in this chart we could talk about, but there are always things in a chart we could talk about, but those are some of the things that stood out to me. Is there anything what's your favorite thing in your chart?
I think the favorite thing in my chart, well, I guess even though it's problematic, the Sun, triple conjunction, Sun, Neptune, Saturn.
The Sun, Neptune, Saturn conjunction is both your favorite thing and problematic?
And problematic, but just kind of coming back to that.
Yeah.
And both of them square Uranus too, just because kind of all about I guess all through my 20s and 30s and into my 40s, it's a long search for identity and a kind of thing. just kind of, and also, the Saturn showed, like, I actually went into puberty late, like at age 17 too, Saturn conjunct Sun.
So it's almost like the Saturn-Sun conjunction has, in some ways, reserved the better part of your life for the latter part of your life, which is often we see that with Saturn as being, it's the planet that holds back until we're ready to really get there, whatever there is. So that's it. Thank you, Rene. And Rene is one of the people involved in the NCGR chapter. So again, if you're interested in that, put your name down there on that piece of paper. And unless there's any other questions or comments or anything from anyone, this is going to be it. Say goodnight.
Good night.
And although it's not a fire drill, we do want to kind of move out of here so that the people who are here, and thank you, Makia and baristas, as always, but we do want to let them go home. And if you have a folding chair or nearby, we can fold those up and put those where, Makia? Oh, back there, about near the exit sign, that would be a help. And and we'll see you all next month.
Click in the screen.